My name's Mark Farley. I'm the Senior Director of Communities and Customer Programs at StorSimple. And I'm here because we have a customer speaking today. And so I'm just getting in the way of you actually having a very interesting experience with our customer presenting about what we do. Well, first I want to set an expectation level. This presentation is not going to be about a lot of the kinds of things that you saw previously, because we're not about transforming things in the cloud. What StorSimple is about is transforming things in data centers. So that's what we're going to be talking about, is how we transform data management in your data center. There's problems that almost every enterprise has. Big problems. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about what StorSimple does. And then I'm going to hand the stage over to Terry Barbunas. And he's going to take you through his history of doing things with the cloud, of making a cloud utility. It's not just about storage, but Terry's been doing a lot of stuff about cloud. And it turns out that cloud storage is part of what he's doing. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end. So let's get started. What's the big mystery? What is this problem that everybody's got? The problem is the amount of data that we store is doubling about every 2 years, right? This is a lot to keep up with. If you run a data center, if you're involved in data center administration, you know this. You're very familiar with this problem. The good news is that the amount of storage, the good news is that the price of storage is continuing to go down. Storage gets cheaper. The bad news is, even despite that, we're still spending more on storage every year, and we're spending more on managing storage. So how do we get so much anyway? Part of it is the type of data that we're creating. Certainly, multimedia, and video in particular, creates huge amounts of data, right? A lot more than photographs, a lot more than word processing. Takes a lot. But I think the real culprit here is that we're pack rats, and we keep stuff. How many copies of a presentation do you have? How many versions of the presentation do you have? How many are in different email folders, different email files? How many are on network drives? How many are on thimble drives? How many do you have? And everybody's like that. Human beings are like that. We're all paranoid. We think we want this data somewhere, so we keep lots of copies of it. And then what happens is that the business does the same thing. The IT organization keeps multiple copies of everything. So a lot of this data growth that you're looking at, doubling every 2 years, is because we're pack rats and we're just keeping all of this stuff. And so in a weird way, the fact that we're pack rats makes data protection harder. We keep all these redundant copies of things, but because we do, backups fail, we can't get them done over the weekends. I mean, if you're involved with backup in an enterprise organization, you know that it's broken, right? I started in the network storage industry 21 years ago working for a backup and restore company called Palindrome. I don't know if any of you remember Palindrome, but it was broken then and it's still broken now, right? It's a process that needs to be replaced with something else. It's just the way it is. So with all this data growth and all this pack rat behavior going on, what's happening with headcount for IT? Headcount for IT is flat. Now, depending on the organization you're with, maybe you got a little bit of growth in headcount, maybe you had big cuts. The problem is there's all this data and storage to manage, right? So what happens? IT in enterprises spend more time every year managing more storage and more data and less time managing applications. So the kind of stuff that's fun, the kind of things that we want to do, the kinds of progress we want to make, we can't because we're spending more time doing storage. Ugh, what a waste of time. So you look at this and you think, can cloud help me here at all? I mean, is there a way that cloud can help this out? And there's kind of a surprising answer. At StorSimple, we make cloud integrated storage. The perspective really is on the on-premises storage, but we use cloud. We leverage cloud. What the cloud does for us is the cloud replaces hardware replaces media, replaces that physical stuff. What StorSimple does, our secret sauce, is that we provide automation and integration, and we replace processes that used to work with the hardware that the cloud replaced. Right, so there's this marriage. In essence, what we're doing is we're taking an old physical management problem, an old storage management problem, and we're converting it with automated, integrated data management, storage management to data management. And we do this in an enterprise fashion. And the enterprise means that it's high availability. You can hot swap anything in our systems. Non-disruptive software upgrades. Certification from major vendors. Certified with VMware. We're on their hardware compatibility list, their HCL. Certified by Microsoft. We integrate with Microsoft applications so you can get clean snapshot copies of data. So it's all enterprise stuff, local storage, but we attach to the cloud. We'll look a little bit more at how that works now. Right. So primary storage with data growth is a problem. The problem with primary storage and data growth is the fact that you eventually have to add more storage to your storage. You have to add more capacity. And when you do that, what happens? You have to break things. You rebalance loads, right? You put new storage in, you have to figure out how to add it. In large enterprises, there are people that work pretty much full-time just to figure out how to make storage capacity work, right? Well, what if you didn't have to do that? What if instead of adding physical capacity, you could just use cloud capacity? Well, would that ever be great, right? I'm not going to buy more capacity. I'm just going to use capacity in the cloud. That's what we do. It's one of the things we do. What about backup? We talk about backup being broken, right? It's a hard process. People spend hours and hours every week and every month on backup. I don't want to say it's fruitless because they get the job done, but there's a lot of failures. There's a lot of things that they won't be able to restore because of the failures they have. We back that stuff up automatically. We take snapshots. It goes to the cloud. Instead of working with dedupe systems or tape systems and doing tape rotation off-site and moving tapes back and forth where you have problems with, oops, I put the wrong tape in the drive or the autoloader picked or I couldn't find the tape with the right label, that stuff is all gone. And the problems of backups not finishing on weekend, all gone, done away with. And that's because we have the cloud for storage and we automate the transfer of data, of backup data, out to the cloud. So what about archiving? Archiving is another thing that eats administrative time. The problem is, if you've got data that's archived, end users eventually come to IT and they say, you know, I need that file back, and then IT has to go around and look for it. They find the right tape, they find the location, and they bring it back. The way we do it is the data that's archived is transparent to the end users. The end users just access it the way they always have. It automatically comes back. IT doesn't get interrupted. They can continue working on fun stuff instead of doing storage. And finally, there's DR. Right? The way we do DR typically is we build a second house. Right? We have one house, and then we say, OK, let's build another house that's just like it, and we'll put all the data in it. It's like, whoa, that's really expensive. Right? Replication is a very expensive process. Maintaining a DR site is very expensive. This is a no-brainer. Use the cloud for DR. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, at some point, DR sites are going to be a thing of the past. People will just use cloud storage for it. I mean, that is a tidal wave that's coming that's unavoidable. So this is the way we do some of the work that we do. We use deduplication, right? And I know some of you folks are familiar with deduplication, but the idea is that, and this is certainly true for VMware environments, but it's certainly true because we're pack rats. We keep similar versions of files. We keep these things that are a lot alike. We keep the same copies in multiple places. Well, why do we do that? The technology of dedupe gets rid of that extra redundant stuff. So you only have to keep a small number of copies of the original stuff. You don't have to keep a zillion copies of it. So we have dedupe in our product. Compression, of course, the idea you start with something that's this big, and you compress it and you make it this big. What's the advantage of that? The advantage of that is on local storage, where we're working, is you actually don't need as much physical capacity. But when you move data to the cloud, you don't need as much bandwidth. It goes faster. And plus, when you are renting storage in the cloud, it's a lot smaller. Smaller by 60 to 80% smaller, right? So you get a great advantage from doing these data reduction techniques like dedupe and compression. Okay, this is cool stuff, right? If you're working with the cloud, if you're using storage with the cloud, what is one of the keys that you would do? You'd say, put stuff on local storage that belongs on local storage, and put stuff on the cloud that belongs on the cloud. Right? Before the cloud came along, you didn't even think this way. You wouldn't even have begun to think that you would separate data by local worthy and cloud worthy. But that's what we do. Hot and warm data, the stuff that your applications are working on, runs in our system on on-premises storage so you can get fast performance from it, from SSDs or SAS drives. And we tier data across SSD and SAS drives, but we also tier out to the cloud. And the stuff that goes on the cloud is inactive data, stuff that you're not using anymore. And we all know we got a lot of inactive baggage on our storage, right? Especially unstructured data, most of it isn't being used anymore. Right? The data profiles are, after 30 days, tend not to access it. After 90 days, never see it again, right? So we have this problem where we're filling up capacity with, and we think it's that we're creating so much new data, but actually the problem is that we're just stockpiling so much old data that we're not even using anymore that we have capacity problems. Okay, take that stuff, move it to the cloud along with backup, archive, and DR. Now the thing that's really cool about this is in a recovery scenario, all you have to bring back is the working set of data, right? All that has to come back is the stuff you really need. Don't bring back the 90% that you don't need. Now, if you're using a product that uses virtual tape or something in the cloud, you're going to bring back multiple images of big tapes. It's going to take forever. The way of restoring this way with thin restores gets the amount of data that you need back in a hurry. So a couple other technologies that we have are encoding, which is hashing, and this is data integrity checking. How do you know what comes back from the cloud hasn't been altered in flight? Well, if it's hashed, we know. We create the hash before we send it out. We read it when it comes back. Voila, everything matches up. It's good, right? If it doesn't match up, download it again. Now the thing is, S3 does regular work all the time and makes sure that you don't have bit errors. So this actually is a very tight system as far as catching problems, catching errors. So we do that. But the other thing is we use encryption. AES 256 encryption. When your data goes out to S3, it's secure. All right. So the last part of it is by the numbers. What does it mean, right? This comes from customers. Using StorSimple is going to save you 60 to 80% of your capacity. No kidding. Really. I know it sounds whacked. Could it possibly be true? Yeah, we'll cut your capacity needs by 60 to 80%. Maybe I said 40 to 80%. I haven't looked at the slide. My apologies. Total cost of ownership. I know. Catch me. Somebody. Whoop! Right? The total cost of ownership, because you're cutting out processes, is 60 to 80% less. That's a lot. This is using the cloud to cut operating costs in your data center. 100% of the data that goes in the cloud is encrypted. All of it's encrypted. 100% of the data that enters the system goes to the cloud. This is great. Everything's protected. It's in the cloud. It's all encrypted. It's safe. It's good news. 90% of what you're going to have here on a system like ours is going to be unstructured data. That's where most of the problems are, managing data. And it's going to eliminate 90% or more of the backup administration that you've got, which gives you more time to enjoy beautiful scenery or at least work on application development or something that's a lot more fun. Now you've heard enough from me. Without further ado, I'm going to bring up Terry Barbunas from First Church of Christ Scientists and the Christian Science Monitor. Let's give it up for Terry.
All right. First, I applaud you for actually showing up when all your friends are out having drinks and dinner, so thank you for that. First Church of Christ Scientists, Christian Science Monitor. Who's heard of it? Has anybody actually visited? Okay. I suggest perhaps the next time you're in Boston to take a visit. Pretty cool. We have 14 acres in downtown Boston. The organization is really two parts. There's the church itself, which is a faith-based nonprofit. By the way, just as a disclaimer, it's not Scientology. It's different from Scientology. I get that question all the time, so I have to state it. About 556 employees. We have 1,800 branches and societies around the world, members in about 130 different countries. The other side of the organization is the one that most people know, which is the Christian Science Monitor, well-regarded international media organization, founded in 1908. It contains, despite the name, again, I get the question all the time, exactly one religious-related article. The rest of it is some of the best, again, obviously an opinion, but you can be the judge, some of the best international non-yellow journalism that I think you'll find. csmonitor.com, so back in 2008, the organization went to a web-first strategy, which means that their content gets pushed out to the website first, and they decided to hyper-focus on a weekly print edition that actually dives into the details of the type of news that around the world that you're typically going to see on a day-to-day basis. And then 7 Pulitzer Prizes and various awards. So again, if you haven't checked out the website, it's pretty cool stuff. So the one thing before I start in this slide to know about the organization is that it's different from a traditional organization from the sense that it's not uncommon to have people tenured there for 30-plus years. So you have people from a technology perspective, when you're trying to make a traditional technology change, they sort of look at you cross-eyed. So when you start talking about cloud, the closest thing they know is Claude, which is the coach for the Bruins. So you have to have those discussions a little more intimately. So we run a Tier 2 data center, probably creep into the Tier 3. We do have redundant paths for power and so forth. We run about 170 servers across the board. 70 servers are virtualized. The rest are physical. The primary OS is Microsoft Server 2008 and Red Hat, although we do have a smattering of Sun and a couple of other OSs. We have a 15 terabyte SAN. We have a pair of 100 meg connections to the internet, metro-grade Ethernet, and our offsite storage is Iron Mountain. Nothing that's out of the norm for any organization. The only thing I'll add is that this is definitely, even though it has a global reach, it's an SMB organization, and I like to say probably closer to the S than the M, because some days there isn't anything less than the S, so I can't go there. So why cloud? Why now? Well, in order to do that, I'm going to tell you a small story about the organization. We go back to 2006. You take a look at some of these numbers. These are the types of numbers that make the guys running IT proud, right? I've got 400 servers. I've got 100 people, $17 million budget. We are cranking, and we're doing it in-house because we like it that way. That's how we roll. The 100 IT staff, by the way, and it's still the case today, probably a dozen or so is actually a project management organization. So project management was incubated and continues to operate within the IT organization. So out of that number that you see here today, you have a smattering of project managers and business analysts and so forth that work on projects with our clients, the businesses, across the organization. So 2006, that is pretty nice. There's no need to do cloud here, because we are hip and we are happening, and we're a church. Well, 2011, not so good. The one number you don't see here, by the way, is the actual employee base. So in 2006, in the prior slide, our employees, it was over 1,000 employees, primarily located in Boston. However, the Monitor has an interesting situation in terms of a workforce because unlike some traditional international newspapers, they rely less on the AP, the Reuters feeds, and so forth, and they rely on boots on the ground. So in the areas around the world that we report from, we have physical reporters that are either stringers on contract or they're employees of the Monitor that are embedded, for the lack of a better sense, in that region to provide better coverage. So 2011, in an organization where your budget is built on one of two things, on the nonprofit side is built by generous donations from people. On the publishing side, it's built from subscriptions, it's built from ad sales, it's built from a lot of the traditional things that a traditional media company would use to build revenue. So when the economy starts to take a hit, when members start to decide they no longer want to be members, that has a direct impact on your budgets. So now you're looking at something, and these numbers are fairly close to where we're running today. You could see your IT staff alone is 25. Remember, out of that 25, you probably still have probably a half a dozen people that aren't directly related with IT from the perspective of operations. They're basically managing projects, so the number's a lot smaller. So downward trend, it's obviously unsustainable to continue. And quite honestly, if it wasn't for this trend, we probably wouldn't be talking about cloud today in regards to the First Church of Christ scientists. It's an organization where employees have a lot more, employees and the line managers have a lot more impact direction that IT goes than in some organizations. Some organizations, your CIO, your CTO says, this is the path, this is what we're going to do, and you'll follow. In this organization, it's a weird phenomenon where you say cloud and they could say, yeah, I don't think so. And they'll go to their direct report, that'll make it up to the board. Next thing you know, you're being called into the board office going, yeah, that cloud thing, not so much. Now, unfortunately, it's unavoidable. So what more can we do? We've cut dollars. We've cut people. And again, no different than many organizations. How about if we look to change what we do? Because in those 6 years, the activities of the organization didn't change. The church still wanted to have an outreach program because the church, they're seekers in the world, they're members, it needs to serve them. And the monitor still needs to serve their subscriber base. So now we need to look at not only changing what we do, but how we actually do it. So we already had a good start. So for the last several years, we've been using Amazon's EC2 for development instances. We moved the organization off of Exchange to Google Apps and Google Docs to try to reduce costs there. We moved arguably the only Tier 1 application that the organization has off to Oracle as part of their on-demand. So they're hosted out of their data center. The only thing we do is manage the configuration and the data within the application itself. We've moved to Salesforce more as a development platform to take the literally thousands of FileMaker databases that over the years were really easy for Bob sitting at his desk to create until they became critical mass. And then it was difficult to maintain that data. So we've been moving that onto a platform that's supportable. And then applications like Replicon for time tracking. So at this point, what else can we do? What else can we look at in the organization that we can leverage the benefits that we got from what we did in the cloud already? And so unstructured data and volume data, when we looked at our file shares, we saw some interesting things there. Not that we didn't know about them, but now we're looking at them with a critical eye. So in the organization, those 556 employees, they basically have 2 map drives on their desktop. They have an S drive and a P drive. I know, very original. The S drive is a shared drive. It basically has a listing, a directory for every department with file permissions on top of it so they can access what they need to access. The P drive is each individual employee's personal drive. It gets mounted based on login scripts. So when we looked at some of that data, you could see some of the numbers here. We're looking at 2+ terabytes, and the last 2 bullets are the ones that really, you look at the amount of money that you pay to replicate this data, to back it up over and over and over again, and you're looking at 73% of the data that hasn't been accessed for at least a year. Oh, and in that data, by the way, we know because we run reports, is the latest Britney Spears videos, right? Is the MP3s. Again, the organization is interesting because it doesn't try to impose the type of restrictions that probably would serve us well in terms of locking down the infrastructure. We don't use quotas because when we implemented quotas, somebody inevitably came back and said, Google gives me 7 gigs. You're only giving me 2. And so you pay the price for it down the road. So we started looking at unstructured data and said, you know what? This is pretty good. We should take a look at what we can do with this. So once we decided that was the case, we needed to put together our requirements for how we were now going to move forward. So like everyone else, we want to continually move from CapEx to OpEx. We want to reduce our overall costs. Again, not rocket science here. Reduce the need for expensive resources, meaning that, as you saw on the previous slide, we have a 15 terabyte fiber channel SAN. And with any type of technologies like that, you got to have the fiber channel guy, the HBA guy. That costs money. It's not that we're looking to get rid of people, but if you saw some of the numbers before, it's obvious that we need to make some changes. And so the idea was whatever we put in place is not going to be something that's esoteric enough that's going to require the organization to staff with that caliber of resource moving forward. The other interesting thing is the departmental usage-based billing. So every department gets cross-charged for the infrastructure of the organization. Now, I have to tell you, it's black magic some days. And they'll look at their billing and they'll say, you charging me how much? It's particularly bad when you have a shared server between two departments using an application. They're sharing the cost 50-50, and one of them says, I no longer want to use it. Because you go to the other guy and go, you owe me money. They're not happy with that. And so part of what we wanted to move to was a model that when we're managing that unstructured data, we wanted to be able, in a fairly accurate manner, to be able to literally show them the bill and say, this is what you owe me plus a convenience fee. Robust disaster recovery. Again, like probably a lot of you here, we've got the FC SAN, we've got a pair of VT virtual tape library devices. We've got tape libraries. All of that goes out to Iron Mountain. Really a hassle. Again, the previous slide, number of people and the number of dollars, $7 million we're talking about, that adds up quickly. And then eliminating tape and offsite storage. And the last bullet, another important one for this organization, but for many others. What do we put in place to handle this unstructured data that has a high user adoption rate, but frictionless access? Meaning that when we implement this, whether or not we tell the users that, guess what, you're now in the cloud, we want them to sit down at their desks, we want them to see an S drive and a P drive, and we want them to continue operating as far as they know exactly the way they've operated. So those are sort of the guidelines we laid out. So I put this slide up here because it was the discussion that I had internal with senior managers. So when I came on board, when the CIO called me and said, we need you to come in and talk to us, work with us to put together a cloud strategy because I think we're off the rails. I said, fine, can you show me what you've already done? This is 6 months worth of work. And so they showed me their spreadsheet and they had some of their requirements, that's good. And then I saw some of the things that they were looking at. They had, you know, Dropbox, they had Box.net, they had some Jungle Disk in there. And so the first question I asked is, hey, somebody raise a hand. Who's going to go hit every desktop to deploy these things? And oh, by the way, where are your encryption keys? Because they're not going to be in your pocket. And so I actually put this slide together for my friends in senior management to basically say to them, I know you want to reduce CapEx, and I know you love the word SaaS, but you need a piece of hardware. And so hardware, software, again, I know I'm preaching to the choir, hardware, software, put it in your customer premise or in a co-location. It's a bridge between your local application servers and cloud service providers. Pretty straightforward. And then a lot of people have used Jungle Disk. It was one of the choices, as I mentioned, a form of a software gateway, and then obviously the StorSimple hardware. So once we agreed that we were going to put in a piece of hardware, this gateway, then we had to sit down and do the analysis and figure out what are the metrics, what are the requirements for what we wanted to put in place. And so I went through, along with the business analysts and the project managers, and we basically looked at the industry, and we looked at what we were trying to do, and we put together requirements based on what we believed we needed to move forward, because this is what other companies have done, and heck, if it's good enough for somebody else, it's good enough for this organization. And so again, the types of things that I'm sure everyone in this room would want, something fully redundant. Even though we have we're big fans of VMware, we did want a physical appliance, and that was more, again, driven by the CIO and the systems engineers who said, you know what, let's not mix the two at this point, maybe in the future, so we purposely look for a hardware appliance. Encryption. Although we are a church and a nonprofit, we fall under the purview of PCI compliance, HIPAA compliance, Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, and being in the state of Massachusetts, they have one of the most restrictive personal information policies in their books. So we don't fall outside of that. And so encryption, obviously very important. Access to multiple clouds. Local performance was another one that came from our systems engineers. We're going to move from a fiber channel SAN to something that's iSCSI. It's not going to work. How am I going to access my Access databases off the S drive? And so that became a requirement, along with having something that was solid state enabled. Thin provisioning. We've had lots of applications that require specific amount of data. If you're never going to use that, you've already allocated, you can't use it for anything else. The local and cloud snapshots, which we'll talk a little more in a second, the clones, were by far the one thing that started to resonate when the guys that actually managed the current infrastructure came into play, and you told them, look, all the cool kids are snapping. They're not running your net backup to your tape. So maybe they are, but they're old school. And so once they were able to actually see it, it really became something that became a driver for adoption by the IT folks of this solution. And then having updates where you don't have to somehow take any downtime to be able to do it. And then, of course, the last one, ease of use, centralized management. I mean, again, we're coming from a complex environment. We want to make sure that whatever we put in place to take us to the next, X number of years is easy to use. So, as I said, we went through the cloud. I went through the cloud gateway providers. I took a look at what they were doing. We spoke to a bunch of people. We looked at all the case studies. I spoke to some of the VCs that are funding some of these companies. And out of all that, and based on our requirements, we decided to go with StorSimple. And this is a short 6 bullet points, as I think are the highlights to why we thought this would be the solution for us and felt comfortable about it. The first one is the whole category of cloud integrated enterprise storage. This idea that we're not talking about a cache here. Right? We're talking about a device, and Mark highlighted this, we're talking about a device that has full authority over every byte that goes in and out of the cloud. It's got full control. It's not toss it over, cache it, and it's done. Full control in and out with all of the benefits that Mark provided earlier. Very important when if you look for something like this for yourselves. The VMware Ready and the Microsoft certification, the VMware Ready in particular, was pretty big for us because we've got mission-critical apps that are running in VMware that are back-ended by that FC SAN. We wanted to make sure that there wasn't anything we were missing in terms of not only migrating the applications on there to be able to run out of in a StorSimple environment, but also the VMDKs. As I said, well-funded by VCs. For our use case, for the requirements that I showed you, we felt they had the best combination of features and price. And again, we said, look, we believe that if you have a good product or service, you should be paid for it. Just don't try to make your entire quarter revenue off of us. If you could accommodate us on price, it's great, and they did. The last 2 points have been both 2 of my pet peeves and 2 of the things that I love about working in technology and with vendors. Savvy, articulate client engineering team. I mean, I don't know about you guys. How many times have you had the engineering folks come out and you think you're being great and you invite the CIO to sit in this meeting. The CIO looks at you afterwards and goes, I'm not sure where you're going to work later, but you ain't going to be working here because I don't know what the heck he said. So there's an engineering team that when they came in and we basically said, look, these are the problems we're trying to solve. You guys tell us what we should do. Because I've got lots of engineers on our staff that go, we'll tell you what to do. Yeah, we've never used this technology, so maybe it should be the other way around. The last one is also something that as an organization that has been very beneficial for us. The idea that you get value before purchase from your vendors. What do I mean by that? In this particular engagement, when we called and we asked questions, before we engaged any further, it was, hey, can I talk to you? I got a bunch of other questions with a bunch of engineers. They accommodated us full swing. There was no talk about price. There was no talk about how many. There was no talk about end of quarter or anything else. And so I felt that after those engagements, again, before purchase, before there are any invoices or anything else, that if the organization had not moved forward with this, that I was better informed about what cloud gateways, what integrated cloud storage means than I was before those discussions. And to me, that equals partnership. Because in an organization this size, we rely heavily on our vendors. The contract that you sign is not a relationship. It basically says, I'm willing to pay you some amount of dollars that we negotiated for a product that we believe is a good product. We mutually agree on that. That's not a relationship. Because, as again, many of you have probably done, you've done plenty of these, signed plenty of those contracts where after you sign, the vendor's gone. Or at least they're not accommodating enough to what you need to do. As I said, very important for us because we wouldn't be able to survive as an organization and deliver what we need to our members of subscribers if we didn't have that kind of an impact from the partners. Proof of concept. One of the things that I want to stress here again, because we went through it, is when you look at this type of technology or any technology for that matter, and especially when you talk about cloud, the specs are great. A lot of people go on specs. but I implore you to do a proof of concept, because it isn't until you've done the proof of concept and gone through it where the questions you might have just asking questions, looking at the specs, become apparent, because now you're running a very pointed setup in your environment with your data set, with your requirements, with the support of the folks that actually built these things. And so when we decided to do a proof of concept, the one other thing I'll add is, because of the size of the organization, we are not an organization that does a couple of proof of concepts and says, we don't want this one, we want this one, we want this one. We don't have the bandwidth to do that. And so it puts extra pressure on us to make sure that we understand what this technology does, that we speak to enough people, that we do enough research, so by the time we hit the proof of concept stage, we know that if, short of something that we never predicted happening on the bad side, that we're going to go to a purchase. So our proof of concept was basically, we wanted to use the StorSimple 5020 device, and if you look at any of the sheets, they have 4 devices now. The 5020 is on the low end. It has 2 terabytes of it has 2 terabytes of usable space, and you can manage up to 100 terabytes through the device. We decided to use Amazon's S3 with multiple regions, and again, we chose the standard region, the Northeast region, and we chose US West for the clone. So they were going to be our truly independent, the equivalent of your truly independent DR tape copies in the form of a clone. We're going out to the West Coast. We took a 2 terabyte data set from the actual data out of those SMP drives that we're actually going to move into that environment when we went to production. We stood up a pair of VMware virtual file servers running Windows 2008, also getting all of their storage through StorSimple. If you remember in the earlier slide, we have a pair of 100 meg connections, part of what to the internet, but what we wanted to test was the quality of service configuration in StorSimple, which is pretty nice if you're worried that all of a sudden nobody's going to be able to get to your network because StorSimple is doing all of its magic on the back end. So we purposely set that to 20 megs per second limit, and we set it between 8 o'clock and 8 in the morning and outside of 8 in the morning and 5 at night. And then the other thing that we're doing that I thought was unique from what I've read is that we're using multiple cloud accounts. Somewhere in the neighborhood, eventually when we go to, when we fully roll this out, we'll be in the 30 to 40 individual S3 accounts. The reason we did that is because part of my comment about the departmental cross-charging is that on that S drive where you have those 30 folders, every department is going to get a cloud account assigned. And we're going to present those mount points under a single drive letter, again, just like those users are accustomed to. The difference now is that when I get my consolidated AWS report every month, I can actually go down and say, legal is using 50 gigs in the cloud. Here's your cost. And then on top of that, I'll add some cost, what I jokingly call the convenience fee, for the burden of actually having the StorSimple. And so the combination of those becomes far more accurate and covers all the tiers: primary data, archiving, backups, snapshots, and tape for that one loaded cost. So the proof of concept, the results for when we ran this. So the appliance setup was 30 minutes. Actually, the only reason it took 30 minutes, no joke, is because when we got to the part of the setup that said, give it an encryption passphrase, nobody could come up with a good one. And so literally the encryption passphrase at about minute 25, and I said, we got to actually move forward and set this up, was, we don't have a better password, exclamation point, because we believe in security. The proof of concept time frame, so the proof of concept was 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, which again, we'll talk some more about the experience. After 2 weeks, we decided, you know what, we've seen what we needed to see. We moved forward with, we started the process of procurement, but we left the setup running for another 2 weeks. So we essentially got a month's worth of testing through this. So we got some dedupe numbers that were interesting. And trust me, I was the first one to go in there and go, what's my dedupe ratio? Because that sounds cool. Our overall dedupe was 12.5. Now, by overall, I mean, remember what we had in the StorSimple at this point was all of the actual volume data, but we were also doing snapshots. We also had the VMware, the VMDKs, everything else going through StorSimple. So across all of that data, 12.5. If we break it down and we look at the actual volume data, we were at about 3.5. And I suspect we're going to get better than that just based on the data set that we were using for testing. Obviously, unstructured data, you're talking everything from Word to spreadsheets to Access to image files and so forth. Your dedupe is going to vary. So when we looked at the numbers, the data that actually was tiered to Amazon for this proof of concept was 285 gigs. Remember, we started with 2 terabytes. And so our Amazon cost for the proof of concept was about $300 for this. The working set data that Mark mentioned, by the way, which StorSimple has a great report in there that allows you to see the very thin tier that doesn't do any type of dedupe. It's your true working set. So when you're running transactions, it doesn't get caught up in the process of deduping. It goes from that tier. That tier was running in about the maybe 30 gig range, and then from there you can actually see the amount of data that's being deduped, the amount of data that's moving from your SSD, your solid state devices to your SAS devices, and then eventually it tiers out to the cloud. And again, one of the things that we liked about the whole the block rank technology that basically looks at your data and decides how to move it was that I didn't have to mess with it. We're not doing anything complex in this environment that would require us to do that. So maybe we're not the best example some days in terms of the kinds of things that you can do with the device, but it was pretty phenomenal. When we actually set this up, we created a new mount point. We created a T drive and a U drive, and we picked a bunch of users in the organization. We picked people in the monitor, and we picked people on the church. And we basically said that between 2 o'clock and 2:15 or 2:30 on this particular date, we want you to go through this. We mounted that drive for you. We want you to go through, and we want you to open up a spreadsheet. We want you to run a video file. We want you to open up an Access database. We were looking to basically drive some amount of traffic. While they were doing that, we were pulling cables on the back end. So we basically did a storage processor failover. We did a file cluster failover. We pulled the power supplies, and then basically came back to that user set and said, so what did you experience? And so from the feedback we got and what we saw, what the engineering team saw firsthand is the failover is literally a second. You'll notice maybe an extra spinning, the beach ball that you'll see on a Mac, and you're good to go. It's no different than the type of hiccup that anyone would see surfing the web on a daily basis when your internet connection takes a hit or hits a spike. So that was pretty impressive. The impressive part also was that if you take a look, we ran this, and then we ran another internal proof of concept just for the virtual machines. The virtual machine deduplication is deduped by 80%. Because you're talking about images that basically are running all Windows. 90% of the stuff that they're running is the same. And so the notion that you can actually see that kind of dedupe in data that is prime for that type of activity is true. I mean, we're happy with it and running it through the proof of concepts. So the cost-saving benefits. Now, we're pretty close in terms of speculation, but if anybody wants to follow up with me after that over the next 30 days or so, when we've got more of this into production, we'll probably do an update. But in terms of our environment, we're looking at a 75% reduction over the current environment. What that amounts to in a cost per gig, and again, these are as close to accurate as I could put together with the finance people, is going from $1 plus per gig to under 25 cents. And again, we're talking about those are the gigs that get charged back to the businesses that at the same time are being asked to do more with less. So it's important for the organization. We're going to move, once this is set up, we're going to move the administration. Things like somebody calling up and saying, hey, I deleted 2 slides out of my PowerPoint presentation, can you restore? All of that is moving to the service desk. Because again, what we want to do is we want to move this activity from the expensive resources, the guys that are tied up doing things only because they're the ones that had access or because it was esoteric enough where the guys in the service desk couldn't handle it. We now have an interface and a setup that easily could be handled from the service desk. which also means that when you have a user that calls up and makes a request, today the ticket comes in, it has to be sent over to the systems guys, it goes into their queue, and when somebody's available, the restore happens. Now we can basically have that back and restored within 15 minutes. And the 15 minutes, again, quite honestly, is because somebody's got to put it in their queue and somebody's not sitting at their desk, so there's some amount of time. The restore itself for something like that is just about instantaneous. Because what you do is you take one of your snapshots. Our snapshots, by the way, local snapshots to the device, we're going to run them every 2 hours. So every 2 hours, we're going to snap that data to the local device. At the end of the day, we're going to snap for the day out to the cloud. And then depending on how the rest of the retention schedule happens is we'll run multiple local cloud snaps, and then obviously the clones that'll be sent out to the the US West region of Amazon. The end state of this is that the existing SAN infrastructure, the SAN, the VTL, the tape library, all gets decommissioned. And we actually purchased, once we did this proof of concept with the 15020, we actually purchased a second one, which initially was, well, the device is fully redundant. You'd have to have something, extraordinary happen for it to completely fail. We feel comfortable having a second one, but if I'm going to buy one, I hate to have it sitting on the shelf. How can I use this? So what we decided to do is we're going to have both devices active. One is going to handle all the virtual environments. It's going to handle the VMDKs, all the mounted storage and so forth, purely for VMware. It'll also have its own cloud account, so we could separate our VMware costs in terms of the cloud as opposed to everything else. And then the second 5020 is going to handle the volume data from various servers in the organizations, app servers, file servers, and so forth. In the event that one of those devices fails, the beauty of this hardware is that there's a configuration file that you can actually download that contains the metadata for what you, basically it's pointers to how you're set up. You take that configuration file from one device, you place it on the second device, so that now you have a piece of hardware that has two configuration files, and it basically takes over both boxes, the activity of both boxes. Now, you don't necessarily have to continue running it that way, but I thought that was great for us because, again, if you're going to make that kind of investment, I'd hate to have it just sitting there, and now at least we've done a little segregation, and we could still leverage a situation where we have a complete failure of one device or the other. So the next steps, we complete our file share production migration, and the file shares as well. Again, the organizations, their files are a little different. The monitor has, their file types are a lot of images. So if you go onto the website or or any of the publication, the staff photographers and the photographs and the media that gets licensed for the monitor to use are all kept in some sort of file share. So different file set than what the overall business uses, which again is Office productivity types of files like Office, Excel, and so forth. So we want to, the first phase of this is to migrate that off completely. The second phase of it is to migrate the rest of the virtual environment over to StorSimple. And the way that we tested that we're going to do this is while the VMware environment is still connected to the SAN, we're going to cross-connect it on the other side so that it can see StorSimple. And so then when it gets time to actually do the migration, we can vMotion those VMDKs over to the StorSimple side. And when it's appropriate, shut down the FC SAN. The reason, by the way, that you saw on the previous slide, it's a 15 terabyte SAN, but we're only using 60% of it is unused. It was a SAN that was bought with anticipation for growth with a much larger organization that once you started cutting back, now you had a piece of hardware that you've already bought into that's not being utilized. So we eliminate all that hardware. From that point, quite honestly, from what we've seen, what we've been able to do in our environment, sky's the limit. We have, I have a friend of mine who's a CEO for a company that builds HRIS software. They're completely Microsoft. They use a lot of SQL on the back end, but their databases are small and they're not really transactional. Basically, if you go in to change your social security number, your employee number, you read a transaction out to the database. Part of the use case that I'm working on, I introduced him to StorSimple, and part of the use case that he's working on is actually taking all those databases, they're about 2 gigs in size, and actually seeing if he can run those through the appliance. And by the way, it looks like, we'll confirm this if anybody who's interested, it looks like it will actually work for him. Which again is not it's not something that you're going to see in any of the glossies, But I guess what I'm saying is when you actually run through the proof of concept, when you understand what something like this device is capable of doing, when you understand your own environment, then it really starts to open up a world of possibilities in asking yourself, this is pretty good, what else can I do? So as I said earlier, that's the end of my presentation. I would only again suggest that if you're interested, have the discussion with these guys. Definitely try to get a proof of concept going, and don't sit back like we did initially with your own teams and say, well, I'm not sure I get it, and until I get it, I'm not going to do anything. Put the pressure on the vendors, right? You heard in the keynote this morning about Amazon's approach that the client should basically have control of their vendors. This is a perfect situation. These guys have done it way many more times than I've done it or you've done it. Put the pressure on them. Force them to prove to you that this works, but at least see if you can get your hands on it, because it's a much different experience than actually just reading the press or looking through the spec sheet and trying to make a determination. So again, thank you very much. I hope it was informative, and enjoy the rest of the show.
Are there any questions? Anybody have questions? We're happy to answer them, and you can come up and ask them in public. Okay, go ahead, please. Question is, and we're using SHA 256 hashtags and encryption. You'll still have our system, and you'll still have the keys for it. So, you know, we're not loaning you the system. You can still get your data back, and you can move it. Yeah, well, at that point, it may take a while. Another thing that you can do a stated goal that we have that is not, it's not readily available yet with the product is the ability to rehydrate and recreate that data in your cloud service provider in S3 so you can access it there. And we want to provide open access to that data, so if you want to move it to the cloud and then use it without us, you'll be able to. We don't have that technology developed yet.
No, there was no reduction of it. I mean, basically, when you configure the credentials within StorSimple, for each account you provided your access ID and your secret key that Amazon provides you. From that point, once you configure the volume, all of the dedupe still happens on the device. All the compression still happens on the device. The only difference is that it goes out to a specific bucket based on that. It goes out to the specific account based on the way you've configured that volume. So if there is any latency and that sort of thing, we didn't see any anomalies in our proof of concept that led us to believe that it would be bad to use that.
No, that's how it works.
Right.
Yeah, that's how it works. Any other questions? Yes? What we have today is a VMware-based VSA, virtual storage appliance, that you can run in EC2. And it is a surrogate of our product. And you can run that, instead of our hardware, you can run that in an instance of EC2, takes the place of one of our systems, and you can access it that way. Yeah, so in the future, we'll build virtual machines that run natively in EC2, not VMware virtual machines, but we do have a virtual machine that does that. Oh, so the question is, what's the difference between what we're doing and a storage gateway? Probably the biggest difference is certification from VMware on the hardware compatibility. That's a big one. Certification with Microsoft, but the high availability, the hot swap of everything, the non-disruptive software upgrades. This system is built to go in and run and basically never shut down. I mean, there are things that happen to all storage products, but this is designed to do that. The integration with applications for snapshots with Microsoft VSS. Those are the big things. The other difference is that we support multiple cloud services. So you know you can use S3 if you want to use Rackspace, Google, Azure, HP. You know, with all of those things.
Not from the StorSimple perspective, but whatever you front end it with. So for instance, with the shared drive, with those departments, we created 30 accounts. However, with the personal directories, which are those 556 employees, we're not going to create 556 accounts. So what we're doing in that case is we created a single cloud account called Home Directories, and the way we're going to build that is we're still going to have that bill from Amazon, so we'll know what the entirety of it is. Then we're going to run a tool on the file share that basically provides the breakouts. So I'll know that my bill is, say, $100 for 100 gigs. When I run that tool, I'll be able to see that John in legal is using 2 of those gigs, and I'll come up with some formula to prorate it that way.
Thanks. We appreciate you having questions, and we appreciate you staying all this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Terry, you're wonderful.
Thank you.